I remember the sound of my alarm clock at 4:45 a.m., sharp, shrill, like it resented me as much as I resented it. It pierced the darkness like a judgment, and for a moment every morning, I sat on the edge of my bed, wrapped in silence, questioning if I could do it all again. The cold air bit at my skin as I dressed in the dim light, slipping into my uniform for the bakery down on 7th Street, where I started my first shift by 5:30. Flour dusted the air like mist, coating my clothes, sticking to the sweat at my temples. I learned to smile through aching calves and wrists that felt like they were crumbling from inside. The ovens radiated heat so intense it made my chest feel tight, but it was the kind of pain that kept me focused. The morning rush began before the sun had a chance to stretch. Elderly couples wanting their regular rye loaf, businessmen with cold eyes and hot espresso demands, mothers juggling toddlers and asking for gluten-free without eye contact. Every thank you felt empty, and yet I handed it over with my own. Have a nice day. By 10 a.m., the smell of cinnamon rolls and sourdough clung to my skin, and I had to run to the back alley just to catch a breath that wasn't laced with sugar and heat. At 11, I clocked out, exhausted but mechanical. I took the bus back home, my legs trembling, standing between strangers who smelled of perfume, cigarettes, and sometimes hopelessness. The ride was 30 minutes, which I used to close my eyes, never fully resting, always aware of each bump and jolt. Back home, I'd heat leftovers for lunch, if we had any, and listen to my mother shouting at the television, complaining about the government, the neighbors, or the rising cost of eggs. She barely glanced at me as I entered, only nodded toward a pile of bills that needed paying. I wanted to scream that I was trying, but my voice felt like a candle flickering in wind. My brother, 16, always had his headphones in, always eating. Something, ramen, chips, cereal, all bought with the money I brought in. He never asked where it came from. He never cared that I just spent 6 hours on my feet. He'd toss the wrappers on the floor and vanish into his room again, like a ghost that never intended to haunt anyone but somehow did. My father, when he was home, sat like a statue, eyes glued to the sports channel, nursing a beer with a look of dull surrender on his face. He hadn't worked in almost a year. By 1:30 p.m., I had to start getting ready for my second job. I changed into a plain blue polo, tucked into black slacks that were starting to fray at the seams. I worked the register at a chain pharmacy, the kind where people came more for cigarettes, scratch tickets, and sadness than for medicine. I greeted each customer like they were the first of the day, even if I could barely keep my eyes open. The beeping of scanned items, the static crackle of the intercom, the endless asking for loyalty cards. It all felt like I was dissolving into something less than human. But I smiled, always smiled, because if I didn't, I'd cry, and I couldn't afford the time for that. I stayed there until 9 p.m. most nights. When I came home, I sometimes found dishes stacked in the sink like they were waiting to be resented. Sometimes my mother would be watching soap operas, laughing like nothing in the world was broken. My brother would be gaming in his room, yelling into a headset, losing to people he'd never meet. I'd go straight to the bathroom, peel off my clothes like shedding a prison, and stand under the hot water until it stopped feeling like punishment. There were nights I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, too tired to cry but too full of grief to sleep. I wondered what more I could give. I wondered if breaking was an option, but in our house, breaking wasn't allowed. It was expected that you just keep moving. That's what survival looked like here. I tried to remind myself that I was doing this for them, for groceries, for rent, for my brother's new shoes, for the electricity that kept the lights on for everyone else to enjoy. But then the words came. Always the same ones. You're never here when we need you. You don't help around the house. Must be nice to be out all day doing whatever you want. It hit like a punch to the gut every single time. My mother's voice, sharp with accusation, even when I handed her my paycheck. My father's silence, more cutting than anything he could say. My brother's indifference, as though I'd chosen this path for fun. They didn't see the calluses forming on my hands, the sleep I sacrificed, the aching that lived in my bones like a second skeleton. They just saw me walking out the door again. They just saw what I didn't do, not what I gave. I stopped hoping they'd understand. I stopped looking for gratitude in the cracks of their words or their glances. But it didn't mean the ache lessened. I kept showing up, day after day, dragging my tired soul through the motions like a worn-out puppet. Sometimes I wondered if I even existed to them outside of the money I brought home. Not once had they asked me how my day went. Not once had my mother looked at my face and seen the shadows clinging to it, the hollows under my eyes that deepened week by week. On a Saturday afternoon, I came home early, an hour between shifts, and I found my brother screaming at my mother because his game console wasn't working. She yelled back, slapping her hand against the wall like it could make her point stronger. I stood in the hallway, soaked in sweat from my bakery shift, holding a paper bag of discounted bread I'd saved for us. And I just watched. They didn't even notice I was there. Not until my father stomped in from the other room and bellowed that he couldn't hear the television. I placed the bread quietly on the counter and went into my room, shut the door, and stared at my reflection in the cracked mirror. My cheeks were hollowing. My lips were dry. My uniform had a tear at the shoulder I hadn't even noticed until then. I looked older than 23. I looked like a stranger. I didn't recognize the girl in the mirror, and I couldn't remember the last time she had laughed. Not chuckled politely, but really laughed, with her head thrown back and light in her eyes. When I emerged later to grab a glass of water, my mother barely looked up from her show. "Oh, by the way," she said, "we're out of detergent, and the sink is leaking again." I nodded. There was no point in asking if anyone else could handle it. I added it to the growing list in my phone: toothpaste, detergent, toilet paper, rice. It was always the same cycle: work, buy, fix, repeat. I kept track like a soldier inventorying supplies during a war they didn't sign up for. That night, I was too tired to eat. I lay on my mattress, the springs poking through the sides like tiny teeth, and stared at the ceiling again. I tried to remember what my dreams used to be. I used to want to study graphic design. I had a sketchbook once, filled with drawings of characters, cities, entire worlds that lived in my imagination. Now it was buried somewhere in my closet, covered in dust and regret. There was no time for dreams anymore, only for schedules and survival. One day at work, my manager at the pharmacy pulled me aside. He asked if everything was okay, said I looked like I was running on fumes. I laughed and told him I was fine, just tired. He gave me a long look, the kind that made me feel seen and exposed. "You're one of the hardest workers here," he said. "Just don't burn yourself out. You deserve a life too." His words haunted me more than I expected. They echoed in my mind during my bus rides, during the quiet hours before sleep. A life. What was that supposed to look like? I barely had time to breathe, let alone build anything real. And yet, part of me clung to those words like a lifeline. I deserve a life. It felt like rebellion to believe it, like betrayal. One afternoon, I came home to find my mother arguing with my aunt on the phone, her voice shrill, twisted with bitterness. "She doesn't help at all," she said, loud and venomous, as if I were invisible. "Always working, sure, but never here. What's the point if I have to do everything myself?" My heart fell through my chest. I turned and left before she saw me, walked 3 blocks to the old playground where we used to go as kids. I sat on the rusted swing, the chain creaking with every movement, and let the silence wrap around me. My hands trembled. My chest hurt. I had given everything I could. My time, my body, my youth, and still it wasn't enough. Not for her. Not for any of them. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted someone to hold me and tell me I mattered. Instead, I sat in the dying light of the day, surrounded by the echoes of children's laughter that no longer belonged to me, and felt the deepest loneliness I had ever known. I didn't know how much longer I could keep going, but I knew I would, because someone had to, and in this family, that someone was me. The next morning, I didn't hear my alarm. My body had given up before I even opened my eyes. When I finally stirred, it was already 6:15 a.m., 45 minutes past the start of my bakery shift. I sat up in a panic, breath caught in my throat, muscles aching like they'd fused to the mattress overnight. My hands shook as I tried to text my manager an apology. No reply. Just the blue check marks and silence. For a moment, I just sat there. No rush, no guilt. Just a stillness I hadn't felt in years. I knew I couldn't afford to miss work, but a darker, heavier voice inside me whispered, "You can't afford to. Keep doing this either." I turned off my phone. No excuses, no apologies, just quiet. I made myself tea and drank it by the window, staring out at the city as it yawned awake. The light crawled across rooftops like it was searching for something, maybe someone, maybe me. The tea scalded my tongue, but I didn't flinch. I wanted to feel it. I needed to. I needed to know I was still here. That I hadn't dissolved entirely into the blur of movement and exhaustion I lived in. When my mother finally realized I hadn't left for work, she banged on my bedroom door. "You're going to be late again," she barked, not even asking why I was still home. I didn't answer. She didn't knock again. She just walked away. I sat there listening to the sound of the television turning on, the low drone of her complaining starting up again. I wondered how long it would take her to notice if I disappeared. Hours? Days? Would it even register as worry or just inconvenience? I went to work that afternoon at the pharmacy because I couldn't afford not to. The bills weren't going to pity me. Rent didn't care if I felt like dying. I showed up with heavy eyes and a hollow chest, smiled at customers, scanned their items, handed them change like it wasn't part of my soul being traded away one nickel at a time. My manager gave me a knowing look but didn't say anything. I appreciated the silence more than I could explain. That night when I got home, the electricity had gone out. My mother was yelling at my father in the dark. My brother was pacing the hall, phone in hand, furious about the Wi-Fi being gone. I opened the mailbox on my way in, stuffed with final notices and envelopes with red letters. One of them had my name on it. I opened it in the hallway light. A disconnection notice for the power bill, addressed to me. They'd put it under my name months ago. No one had told me. I stood there, blinking back heat in my eyes. Not just tears. Shame, fury, disbelief. I paid the bills, I bought the groceries, I gave and gave and gave, and now they were tying their failures to my name, dragging me down into a pit I didn't dig. I walked into the kitchen, slammed the notice on the table, and said, "Why is this in my name?" My mother barely looked up. "They needed someone with income. What does it matter?" What does it matter? The words echoed like gunfire in my ears. I walked out again. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to leave. The night air hit me like a slap, cool and sharp and almost tender in comparison. I walked aimlessly, for what felt like hours, through streets that blurred into each other, past closed shops and flickering streetlights, past homes with laughter leaking through their windows like warmth. I didn't know where I belonged anymore. I wasn't part of my family, not really. I was their machine, their ATM, their fixer, but never their daughter. Never their sister. I ended up at the train station, watching people come and go with purpose in their strides. I sat on a bench, legs pulled to my chest, and wondered what would happen if I got on one of those trains. Disappeared. Started over. Would anyone chase me? Would they even notice? Or would they just complain about the things left undone? Groceries not bought, bills not paid, chores unfinished. That night, something inside me began to shift. A slow, aching movement, like tectonic plates deep beneath the earth. I didn't know what it meant yet, only that I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't keep being a ghost in my own life, haunting my family with the echo of sacrifice they never heard. When I finally returned home, the power was still out. The house was quiet. I stepped over my brother's shoes in the hallway, brushed, past the laundry piled on the stairs, and returned to my room where the silence was kind, even if the darkness wasn't. I lit the candle I kept in the drawer, watched the flame flicker against the walls, and opened my sketchbook for the first time in years. The pages were stiff, the smell of old paper rising like memory. My hands trembled as I picked up a pencil. I didn't know what to draw. I just knew I had to. I had to put something down that was mine. Something no one could claim or need or take away. The pencil moved slowly at first, unsure, but then it flowed. A figure began to emerge, curled up, tired, but alive. And above her, light. Not much. Just a spark. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt the tiniest ripple of peace inside me. I didn't sleep much that night, but for once it wasn't because of stress or schedules or the weight of things undone. It was because my hand wouldn't stop moving. My mind wouldn't let go of the images pouring out of me like a dam had, cracked open. I drew until the candle burned low, until wax spilled over the lip of the holder and hardened into little white rivers on the windowsill. I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd buried until it started to surface again, line by line, shade by shade. I felt like I was breathing for the first time in years. The next morning, I didn't rush out of bed. I didn't leap at the wee sound of the alarm or stumble toward the door with my uniform half-buttoned and my soul left behind. I sat up slowly, looking around my room as though seeing it fresh. The walls still held cracks. The carpet still smelled faintly of damp. The light still filtered through cheap blinds in dull streaks. But there was something different. I was different, not better, not fixed, but awake. I took a day off, my first real one in almost 2 years. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't owe them that. Instead, I walked. I found a small cafe near the edge of town I'd never noticed before, the kind with dusty books on shelves and a chalkboard menu smudged with fingerprints. I sat by the window with a coffee and watched strangers pass, wondering what their lives felt like inside their bones. No one asked me to smile. No one demanded anything. I sipped slowly and sketched again, the lines looser this time, more alive. When I came home, no one said anything. No one even noticed I'd been gone all day. My mother was still slouched on the couch, flicking through channels like she was trying to find a version of reality that didn't hurt. My father was asleep, mouth open, breath thick with beer. My brother was yelling into his game, voice high with fury at someone in another country. And in that moment, something inside me hardened, not cruelly but necessarily. I realized I had to leave, not dramatically, not with slammed doors or accusations or letters left on tables, quietly, carefully. With the same precision I'd used to build their lives, I would now rebuild my own. I started setting aside money, not for rent, not for groceries, not for electric bills that bore my name like a curse. For me, for my escape. Every $10 bill, every tip I earned at the pharmacy, every coin I pulled from my pocket at the end of the day, I hid it away like a promise. I began applying to schools again, late at night when the house was still, and the television static was the only sound. I uploaded my old portfolio and added new pieces, ones that still smelled of fresh breath and reclaimed hope. I started emailing colleges, writing essays not about perfection, but survival. I told them my story, not to earn pity, but to declare existence, to show that I had lived through something, and I still believed in more. It took months, but one day, the letter came. It was small and thin and unremarkable on the outside, but inside, it held a future. I'd been accepted to a community college, in a town 4 hours away. Not a big leap, not a glamorous one, but far enough to feel the wind on my skin and know it wasn't the same air I'd choked on for so long. I sat in the stairwell, holding the letter to my chest, and let myself cry, really cry, for the first time in years. Not from pain, from relief. I waited 2 weeks before I told them, not because I needed their blessing, I knew I wouldn't get it, but because I wanted to leave on my own terms. I came home one night and sat at the kitchen table. My mother didn't look up. My brother didn't take off his headphones. My father didn't stir. "I'm moving out," I said quietly. That made them look. "Where?" my mother asked, her voice already tight with anger. "I got into school." Her lip curled. "And who's going to pay the bills?" "I've paid them long enough," I said. My voice didn't shake. They argued. They accused. They made guilt into knives and threw them one by one, expecting me to bleed as I always had. But I didn't. I let them speak. I let them twist the story. I knew the truth now. I had held this family on my back for too long, and the weight had broken me more times than I could count. But now I was learning to stand straight again. The day I packed, no one helped me. I stuffed my clothes into a second-hand suitcase. I wrapped my sketchbooks in shirts to protect them. I left the rest. I didn't need reminders of a life that had never really been mine. As I stepped out the front door, no one came to say goodbye. But I didn't look back. The road ahead wasn't paved. It was uncertain and rough and full of terrifying freedom. But it was mine. Every step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd given away. I didn't know what success would look like. I didn't know if the world had a place carved out for someone like me. But I knew I would carve one if I had to, because I had worked 2 jobs. I had given everything. And now, finally, I was going to give something to me. Even if they never saw it. Even if they never said thank you. Even if they called me selfish, I was done surviving for them. It was time to start living for me.